Well, good evening, everyone. It's been a day of incredible, exciting conversation. And as we examine AI in its various avatars, it's perhaps important to also look at how enterprises across the world, how companies across the world, and how systems across the world will evolve in utilizing the technology which is now available to us. It's about regulation, it's about cooperation, it's about dealing with the disruption. And that's something that we'd like to do in this panel. The questions also pertain to governments and the need to recalibrate industrial policy, perhaps dealing with digital infrastructure as it evolves. We've got Paul Triolo, partner at DJ Albright Stonebridge Group with us. Nikhil Malhotra, Chief Innovation Officer at Tech Mahindra, and Amit Zaveri, President and Chief Product Officer at ServiceNow. Thank you all very much for being with us. Broadly speaking, the biggest concern is this technology exists at a time of huge global disruption for various reasons, which aren't necessarily linked to AI. We live in a world which is fraught with dangers and differences. Why should one country or one company tell another country or company that they are willing to share this technology?
That's for me?
Yep.
Okay, wow. It's a good question. I think that we're in an era where there is a lot of competition between nations, particularly in AI, the US and China. So the technology has become sort of national securityized, if you will. And so this really started with 5G telecommunications. There was a lot of concern about country of origin of telecommunications equipment. And now AI, of course, with its incredible capacity to enable lots of nefarious things like cyber operations and other things. There's a real concern about who controls, who builds AI, who controls it, and where it's deployed. And we've seen many discussions on this at the summit this week, and as you've heard today. So AI is really it's such a potentially transformative technology that who controls and who builds it is going to be necessarily a geopolitical issue.
Without legislation, it's not going to work, right? But again, just being the pessimist that I am, can I ask you the same question? You can have regulation, but who's going to follow it and who's going to enforce it globally?
Yeah, I think we'll have to take it in two piecemeals, Vishnu. We'll have to look at it from a demographic purpose in terms of what we do, and then look at it from a global perspective in terms of legislation. I think today, if you notice, almost every country has some kind of an AI act that they're trying to follow. But parameters of some of the AI act which is done in one country is not really followed in the other country. And that's largely true. The reason is your ethics, my ethics are very different from what a person in London or US would look like it. And so we have to have a little bit of a template which follows general ethical guidelines. But then there are certain things that we have to do from a demographic or a country perspective. I think I am of the opinion that if you can have a global legislation, but there's no global sector which says that this is right or wrong. So what we should really be doing is that each country should follow a certain bit of ethics and bias systems that they follow in their own country. But at the end of the day, there should be some rules in terms of data and also data exchange across borders. And that is really something that is harming us. For example, kids are on the Facebook. If the kids' data goes out to, let's say, somebody in some other part of the country, what's the legislation that should be used and should not be used? And I think we've done some work from an India perspective in doing that, right? So the DPDPA Act is some part of it saying that we shouldn't be sending data out from some parts that we do and we collect. But there has to be a balance. The balance is models built outside. Can we use a little portion of those models to do what we are doing over here and turn it in terms of what we do?
But Nikhil, let me ask you this. As the Chief Innovation Officer at Tech Mahindra, when you have incredible new software, whether it's AI or not, do you sit back and ask yourself, am I releasing something that I should? Is there the issue of ethics, which precedes business interests?
No, I think that's a great question. We do. I think I'll just recount a little bit of story. I think 2023, Sam was here. A challenge was made saying, can India build its own AI and LLM from grounds up? You remember CP took the challenge. I took the challenge at the back saying that I would deliver it. We delivered it. We delivered it in less than about, whatever, $400,000 that we did. I think one of the things was very clear in my mind, that is that our data, and are we really being true in terms of the dialects that this country speaks? Unofficially, our country speaks almost about 19,200 dialects. Some like about 100 people odd. Am I being true to that dialect if I actually pick it up? And am I being ethical? So I actually sent teams out, Vishnu, to the Hindi heartland to actually collect data. Funny story, we had tape recorders in our hand and we were telling people, can you speak something? Right? Don't speak about your Aadhaar number, don't speak anything, but speak something in your own dialect so that we understand what we get. I think that was one part of it. I think the second part of it was, we knew that unless we collect the right amount of data, our AI system is not going to work. And I'm sorry, I'll switch a little bit into Hindi. Let's take a sentence. Last week I saw a film. In Hindi, we very clearly say, "Pichle hafte maine film dekhi." If you're a Marwadi, you would say, "Larla hafte maine ek film dekhi." There's just one change in the token. But Larla, if it's not counted by me, actually becomes closer to Ladla. Ladla hafte maine ek film dekhi has no connotational reference. So if I'm giving my AI to people in India, or let's say if I'm doing this across the world with some other country as well, am I being true to the ethical systems and what the society really feels? Which is very, very important for me. So yes, we do look back and see when we build it in terms of what we're doing.
That's wonderful to hear. Let me ask you, Mr. Zaveri, I read something on Twitter just a couple of days back, and it struck me as being, a very sort of negative vision of what lies ahead. So somebody tweeted and said that we are now at a COVID-like moment. We never believed that illness, which is there in China, is going to affect our lives, and that it's self-limiting and it'll go away, and so we just have to be a bit careful. Then we started wearing masks, and then people started, unfortunately, losing their lives, and then we knew what we were in for. Is this a COVID-type moment with AI?
No, it's an interesting analogy in terms of what's going on with AI, right? I mean, in the day, the innovation happening and the reality behind AI is all, everybody's understanding it now. I don't think anybody's confused that there is power of AI and there's a lot of benefits, but there are a lot of concerns. And how you balance the two things is really the question, right? I think COVID moment took a lot of people by surprise. I don't think AI has been a surprise. We've been talking about AI for probably 10 years now. I think that what's happening now is that a lot of the things are all starting to come together. Every part of any industry you look at it, anything you look at a society, everybody's aware of it. And I think the question becomes, how do you use it in a way which helps you? That's the part, I think, which is confusing for many people. Some people are worried about job losses. Some people are worried about what happens to your industry. And some people are worried about how do you control it and how do you manage it. Does AI control you, or are you going to control AI? But there's no confusion that this is going to impact your life. And that, I think, is the part which everybody has to deal with, is to ensure that they're thinking through adopting it in a way which will help you, while also understanding the power of it, so that you can put some controls around it and some guidelines around it, so that you can get benefits out of it in the long term.
Paul, my big concern, and I think a lot of people share this concern, it was expressed, in fact, a little while back in sessions over here, is that the technology is growing so fast that it's potentially dangerous. To not have a human in the loop at all times is dangerous. To have systems which replicate empathy is dangerous. It has transnational consequences, and yet we don't have any legal system which protects different people around the world. There's no United Nations which governs the international use of AI. Are we therefore potentially headed for trouble at a mass societal level in various fields?
Great question. And we discussed this a lot today, actually, another panel. So look, the companies that are developing this technology are not standing still. They realize some of these dangers, right? And so they're putting in place, for example, responsible scaling policies internally to try to put in place checks so as the models become more capable, there'll be triggers and they can mitigate some of the risks around this. But the risks come in many forms, right? There are more existential risks, for example, of an AI model taking somebody who doesn't have a PhD in biotechnology and enabling them to design a bioweapon, for example. That's a real fear. So the companies are very aware of those kinds of risks and are taking steps to mitigate those. Now, the really big risk that sort of came to light even in the last couple of weeks with this thing called Moltbook or OpenClaw is loss of control. And that's a really tough risk to get your head around, because the agents are becoming more capable, and as we get into an agentic world where those agents are taking actions and impacting the real world too, in more embodied AI kinds of applications, then the risks, the thinking is the risks become greater that we'll lose control of those models, and then there'll be an impact in the real world. Now, last year when I was at a conference in China, Stuart Russell, who was here earlier,
Stuart raised a lot of concerns.
Stuart said something like he had talked to the CEO of a leading US AI lab who said the best we can hope for in the next couple of years is a Chernobyl-style event. So there are many in the broader safety community who think that the company, there is a lot of obviously economic incentive to keep innovating and deploying more capable models, and he feels, many feel that it'll probably take an event where, and hopefully it won't be as catastrophic as Chernobyl, but some event where AI enables something bad to happen, and that will focus governments around the world to get serious about some kind of a global agreement. Because as you rightly point out, if one country or one set of companies adopts really rigorous safety protocols and builds in a lot of safety, but that's not shared universally in other countries, then the risks, this is a global technology and the risks become global.
Nikhil, Tech Mahindra obviously has been at the cutting edge of software development. You've now got software that develops itself.
Yeah.
So let me ask you a super pointed question. What happens to young coders who you potentially would have hired?
Yeah, I think great question. I think we're still at that stage where there's a lot of fallacy and myths being talked about that AI can rewrite and write its software. From the lens that we look at it, there are two ways that you do, right? If you're a product company, no doubt, and you start afresh, 50% of your code still can be written by AI. But from a services standpoint, when we deal with customers, these codes are not very simple codes that you do, right? They've got a large number of integration layer behind the scenes that you do. If I use an AI, we have actually sometimes seen reverse as well in terms of productivity. So you've got to be very careful in terms of where you apply it. And productivity is a term that is loosely flayed out and said that we'll be 40% productive, 50% productive. We have benchmarks. One of the hats, Vishnu, that I don is also a researcher. I've been doing it for the
past. Researcher, yeah.
Along with obviously the corporate life in terms of what you do. But in my research, I've actually found out that to start off with, if you're looking at a brownfield code, you would see almost at an instant, you'll find 15% to 20% productivity come up, but you also need a human hand to actually mold. Now, what happens to the youngsters who come in? If I only use AI as an API, yeah, or only as a system that, you just put some data in and it gets back, yes, there is a risk. But if you understand what is going on in the underfiddles of AI, then it's not a risk. You have a job still. And you need the human in the loop to actually figure out what's the result that the AI is coming up with.
No, so the youngest and the most junior coders, who may not be required because you've got the machine writing code, would need supervisors, which is where humans fit in. So in other words, those who are coders today move on to a supervisory role. Yes. Because the role they were hired for doesn't really work in the same way. Is that correct?
No, you're right. I think in certain cases, yes, there is change that we are actually seeing, and they're seeing a change in the roles as well. But the youngsters who are coming up, let's say a freshman out of college who wants to now join Tech Mahindra, we look at it from two different perspectives. Number one, do you understand the basic construct right? Because none of the AI applications we do with our customers work off the cuff as it is.
Right.
They need a lot of customization still. You still need people to sit and understand the objective. Yes, there is an objective being posed to you. I want 90% accuracy, and I want it in less than 5 seconds. But that doesn't really happen when the rubber hits the road. So I think that is important for us to realize from a pragmatic sense.
Can I just add one thing in terms of we also hire a lot of engineers. We have 15,000 R&D employees. And we've been growing them because a lot of the young coders are coming in who are helping think about a lot of ways using AI technologies, which is helping the rest of our organization as well. So the growth has been happening. I think most of the engineers just don't write code, as you are mentioning. So that has been the difference now. A lot more design time is happening. A lot of user experiences are changing. So there's a lot of opportunity for a lot of new engineers coming in, bringing different kind of skills as part of the software development cycle has changed. If you remember when cloud happened, What engineers used to do is when they were building on-premise software, they never had to run operations. They would ship the software and they never had to care about how it got implemented. But when the cloud happened, all the engineers' work changed because now they became supporting that software. Same thing's happening with AI. Now you're doing a lot of other kind of things. I think it's just the roles are changing. I don't think the jobs will completely go away.
Final question to you, Mr. Zaveri. 2 words. Depends how it's spelled, of course. Semiconductors. It's make or break around the world. They're not available. And semiconductors, the present design of semiconductors and the computation which AI can actually afford can give you now means that a lot of systems which are available, I'm talking about gaming systems, for example, they're all on hold because the technology is evolving so fast that you may need new sets of chips to meet the processing power which exists, and those chips don't exist. I mean, they're not available.
Yeah.
Is that a crisis?
I think so. I mean, we're seeing that, when it was very hard to find chips when we were doing a lot of the work a few years ago. Now the same thing happening with memory. So without the core infrastructure, it's going to be difficult to run some of these models and be able to do any kind of work you do with inferencing and be able to respond. And that's the question which becomes an important thing for enterprises. If you completely depend only on AI and you don't have other parts of software, you might shut down as a business. Yeah. So it has to be a big part of the infrastructure to make sure you think through that and not just put everything on one kind of system.
Vishnu, if I may add, to that point, I think this is also an opportunity in disguise for us.
It has to be an opportunity for you to run your business also.
To run the business as well, yes, but also the opportunity in saying that when you look at a semiconductor chip today, you are still looking at bits and bytes in terms of zeros and ones. There is an alternative mode that the world is trying, which is also more analog. Your and my life is more analog than just being zeros and ones.
We're getting old, or we already are old, but anyhow.
So that is something that we are probably looking at. Neuromorphic computing is actually coming up. So you'll see a lot more divergence happening in terms of even the chips.
One last comment on that.
Yeah.
I think also the problem now, for example, in the U.S. is energy. How are you going to power all of these chips? Problem. So it's really the shortage is not necessarily the semiconductors, the GPUs. They're in high demand and the capacity is being built. Memory is a big problem. But how are you going to power all these data centers? The U.S., for example, doesn't have a very unified grid, and the projections of data center build out to 2030 are huge,
right.
And there's a huge gap in terms of the energy supply. Some other countries like the Middle East have an advantage here, and India also is I think is going to be one of the big players because the gap is not as big, but it's a huge issue.
It is indeed. Yeah. Look, gentlemen, we could keep on talking, but we need to start wrapping up this session, right? We may be replaced very soon by AI at this rate, but it's been a fascinating conversation, a conversation that really looks at how we are going to be working across the world in terms of technology, in terms of governance, in terms of the systems, in terms of ethics, values, in the absence possibly of laws. So there's a lot to take in there. I'd like to thank the three of you very much for being with us. Thank you.
Thank you.